There is a moment, a very precise, subtle micro-expression that occurs right before someone realizes they've lost total control over you. Their pupils dilate slightly, their voice shifts pitch, subtle micro-tremors appear in their vocal range, and their posture stiffens. They came into the interaction expecting a script. They poked, they provoked, they threw out a precise emotional lure designed specifically for your temperament, expecting you to take the bait. They expected defensive arguments, raised voices, tearful explanations, or desperate attempts to justify yourself. Instead, you gave them nothing. Absolute, unyielding, calm silence. What they don't realize, and what most people fail to understand about human behavior, is that human beings are fundamentally feedback-addicted creatures. When a manipulative or hostile individual tries to trigger you, they aren't just looking to win an argument, they are desperately searching for neural feedback to regulate their own internal chaos. Your reaction is their fix. It validates their power, calms their internal insecurity, and gives them a target to focus on so they don't have to look at themselves. When you withhold that reaction, you break the circuit. To the untrained eye, silence looks passive. It looks like you're taking the high road, turning the other cheek, or simply retreating. But in the hidden language of human behavioral profiling and high-stakes psychological influence, silence is the ultimate power inversion. It forces the manipulator into an immediate state of cognitive overload. Their mind begins to race. Why aren't they responding? What do they know that I don't know? Have I lost my leverage? Are they plotting their next move? Because the human brain hates ambiguity, your stillness becomes a massive psychological vacuum. And in a vacuum, the human mind will always default to filling it with its own deepest insecurities and paranoia. By saying nothing, you cause them to wage an invisible, agonizing war against their own thoughts. They try harder, their tactics get sloppy, their micro-expressions leak panic, and eventually, their entire framework of control collapses right in front of you. If you stay to the very end of this message, you will discover the exact behavioral mechanics of why silence destroys a manipulator's playbook, how to execute non-reactive neutrality without breaking character, and the precise moment your quiet stillness flips the power dynamic permanently in your favor. Listen closely to what I'm about to tell you, because understanding this single truth will permanently alter how you interact with every toxic or manipulative person in your life. When someone attempts to provoke you, they are relying on a fundamental rule of social interaction. Action demands reaction. They throw a verbal stone, and you are supposed to flinch. They attack your character, and you are supposed to defend it. They create chaos, and you are supposed to run around trying to fix it. This is the script. It is predictable, measurable, and highly controllable. When you refuse to play your part in that script, the entire dynamic collapses. Your silence is not just quietness. It is an impenetrable mirror. When you stand before someone who is actively trying to trigger you, and you maintain complete control over your facial baseline, your respiratory rate, and your voice, you are sending a visceral signal directly to their subconscious mind. You have zero authority here. They will try escalation first. They will raise their voice, use harsher words, or drag up past mistakes. They are fishing for a micro-expression of anger, fear, or frustration. Anything that proves they still have a remote control over your emotional state. But when you remain completely unbothered, sitting calmly in your power, their brain encounters a catastrophic error. They begin to overthink. The confidence they mimicked melts away, replaced by deep internal panic. They realize that their tools no longer work on you. The person they thought they could push around has quietly become an unshakable force. You do not need to explain yourself. You do not need to get the last word. The ultimate victory in any psychological game is letting the other person realize that their greatest efforts cannot even move a single muscle on your face. Hold your silence, hold your ground, and watch how quickly their illusion of control crumbles. The concept of the power inversion begins with a fundamental law of human behavior. Manipulators do not act in a vacuum. They act in anticipation of a yield. Every provocation, every veiled insult, and every calculated boundary violation is an investment designed to yield an emotional dividend. When an aggressor attempts to trigger you, they are operating from a subconscious place of internal instability. They carry a chaotic emotional ecosystem that they cannot regulate on their own, so they project that hostility onto you. They rely on your defensive reaction, your anger, your anxiety, or your desperate need to explain yourself to absorb their internal tension. Your emotional turbulence becomes the container for their chaos. When you absorb that payload and react on cue, you validate their attempt at control, and for a fleeting moment, their internal instability feels managed. When you introduce complete, absolute silence, you perform an immediate and aggressive power inversion. By withholding the expected emotional payload, you cut off their access to an external regulator. The hostile energy they launched into the interaction finds no anchor, no target, and no pathway to discharge. Because energy must go somewhere, that unabsorbed hostility immediately bounces off your neutral baseline and reflects straight back into the mind of the person who generated it. They are suddenly forced to sit in the quiet room with the very chaos they were trying to project onto you. This creates a state of acute cognitive overload. The human brain, particularly one driven by manipulative or narcissistic tendencies, cannot tolerate unanswered ambiguity. The moment you offer zero emotional feedback, their internal narrative fractures. They start scanning your facial features, searching for micro-expressions of hesitation, fear, or suppressed rage. When they find none, their brain begins to manufacture catastrophic interpretations to fill the silence. They begin asking themselves critical, anxiety-inducing questions. Why aren't they defending themselves? Have I lost my leverage? Do they know something I don't know? Are they planning a countermove? Without a single word spoken, the roles are entirely reversed. You have moved from the position of the defense attorney, constantly justifying your existence, to the silent judge observing an unraveling witness. The manipulator, once convinced they held the steering wheel, is now frantically overcorrecting. You will observe this shift in real time through their physiological leaks: a sudden increase in speech cadence, a subtle tightening of the shoulders, eye shifts, or an immediate leap to even more absurd accusations in a desperate bid to get any reaction at all. Your silence acts as a psychological vacuum. It strips away the illusion of their authority and lays bare the profound fragility underlying their aggression. They come to the sudden, unsettling realization that their power was never real. It was merely a privilege you had previously granted them by choosing to care about their input. By remaining completely neutral, you demonstrate total self-sovereignty. You communicate that their thoughts, opinions, and attacks do not possess enough weight to disturb your resting state. You do not have to conquer them, defeat them, or out-argue them. You simply allow their own toxic momentum to pull them off balance, forcing them to swallow their own poison while you remain entirely intact. Every human interaction operates on an unwritten, highly predictable behavioral script. When an individual attempts to manipulate, deceive, or emotionally provoke you, they are not acting spontaneously. They are executing a carefully rehearsed sequence of moves designed to elicit a specific, guaranteed response. In the domain of psychological profiling and behavioral analysis, this is known as an baseline expectation loop. The manipulator initiates a stimulus, whether it is a backhanded compliment, an overt accusation, gaslighting, or a calculated silence of their own, and their nervous system anticipates a direct, reactive echo from yours. They expect you to lean forward, raise your voice, justify your actions, stammer through defenses, or display visible signs of distress. This anticipated reaction is the core mechanic of their strategy. It gives them a predictable map of the interaction and allows them to predetermine their next three moves. When you deliberately deprive them of this expected script, you completely shatter their operational blueprint. The human brain relies heavily on predictive processing to navigate social hierarchies and interpersonal conflicts. When a person projects a high-intensity emotional stimulus and receives a completely neutral, unbothered, and silent response, their predictive processing mechanism suffers a total catastrophic error. The script they spent time preparing is instantly rendered useless. They are suddenly forced off-script into uncharted territory, stripped of their pre-planned retorts and tactical follow-ups. This unexpected breakdown in the loop triggers immediate cognitive friction within the manipulator. Because their initial move failed to generate the required leverage, their nervous system interprets your lack of reaction not as compliance, but as an unpredictable threat. The balance of predictability shifts entirely. Where they expected to see your emotional dysregulation, they encounter an unyielding wall of self-possession. They are forced to instantly abandon their aggressive posture and pivot toward rapid, chaotic reassessment. They must process a torrent of internal questions. Why didn't the insult land? Did they see right through the trap? Is my leverage gone? Why are they so calm? As they struggle to make sense of this broken script, their behavior will inevitably become sloppy, desperate, and erratic. You will notice them cycling rapidly through secondary manipulation tactics in a frantic attempt to find a new vulnerability. They may escalate the intensity of their attacks, abruptly pivot to playing the victim, or attempt to flatter you, all within the span of a few moments. This erratic switching of tactics is a clear indicator that their baseline strategy has disintegrated. By refusing to deliver the expected line in their script, you take away their ability to control the direction, tempo, and outcome of the interaction. You effectively force them to confront the reality that their entire framework of control was built on an assumption of your reactivity, an assumption that no longer holds true. Silence is frequently misunderstood in conventional social dynamics as a passive response, a sign of defeat, submission, or an inability to articulate a defense. However, in high-stakes behavioral intelligence and tactical influence, absolute silence is the highest form of active strategic dominance. True power in any human interaction does not belong to the person who speaks the loudest, projects the most force, or demands the final word. It belongs unequivocally to the individual who maintains absolute command over their own internal state, while observing the uncontrolled reactions of others. When an aggressor attempts to trigger you, they are making an overt bid to dictate the emotional climate of the environment. By choosing not to engage, you strip them of that privilege and assert total sovereignty over your cognitive baseline. This level of deliberate non-reactiveness sends a powerful, primitive signal to the brain of the aggressor. In human ethology and social status hierarchies, the individual who feels compelled to explain, defend, or counterattack is subconsciously signaling vulnerability. They are acknowledging that the incoming stimulus holds enough weight to threaten their status, forcing them into a defensive posture. Conversely, the individual who absorbs an aggressive stimulus with unwavering eye contact, steady breathing, and zero verbal engagement communicates an undeniable truth. Your input lacks the magnitude required to alter my behavior. This is not an act of emotional repression or retreat. It is an active, calculated display of total self-regulation and unshakable authority that instantly rewires the power hierarchy in the room. When you master silence as a strategic asset, you dictate the tempo and boundary lines of the entire interaction. An aggressor expects speed, chaos, and immediate friction. They thrive on a rapid exchange of emotional energy that obscures their own logical fallacies and insecurities. By inserting a wall of absolute calm, you artificially slow down the room. You create a psychological vacuum where their aggressive posture is left fully exposed, unsupported by any conflict momentum. They are forced to stand alone in the weight of their own words, while you remain entirely detached, observing their tactical mistakes in real time. This posture of composure places the manipulator in an impossible position. They cannot maneuver against an opponent who offers no friction to push against. Every attempt they make to manipulate, provoke, or reassert control simply glides off your neutral demeanor, forcing them to expend vast amounts of mental energy while achieving zero tactical progress. By maintaining total mastery over your own tongue and posture, you transform silence from a simple absence of noise into an active, impenetrable shield, proving that true dominance is never declared, but quiet, absolute, and utterly indifferent to provocation. The reflection effect represents a fundamental law of emotional energy. Hostility requires an external target to sustain itself, and without that target, it turns inward. When a toxic or manipulative individual launches an attack against you, they are rarely acting out of calm, rational strategy. Instead, they are attempting to purge themselves of an unbearable internal payload, an ongoing storm of shame, deep-seated insecurity, rage, and self-loathing. Because their ego lacks the maturity to process or integrate these heavy emotions internally, their survival instinct compels them to project that toxic weight onto someone else. They create an external conflict, deliberately provoking you so that your resulting pain, confusion, or anger can serve as proof that the problem lies outside of them. Your emotional dysregulation becomes the trash can where they dump their own internal toxicity. The moment you respond with absolute, unyielding silence and emotional neutrality, you effectively close the lid. You refuse to serve as the vessel for their projected self-hatred. When their hostile words, passive-aggressive jabs, or manufactured crises hit your calm baseline, they find nothing to hold on to, no defensive resistance to fight against, and no emotional entry point to exploit. Unable to penetrate your composure, the toxic energy they generated cannot dissipate into the environment or be absorbed by you. It has nowhere left to go except back to its source. This creates a severe psychological rebound effect. The hostile payload ricochets backward, forcing the toxic individual to absorb the full, concentrated weight of the very emotion they tried to force onto you. Without your chaos to focus on, they are stripped of their primary distraction. They are suddenly forced into an immediate, unavoidable confrontation with their own internal filth. The silence you provide acts as a stark, unblemished mirror, reflecting every piece of their irrationality, insecurity, and malice directly back at their own consciousness. In this reflective space, the manipulator's internal structure begins to disintegrate. They watch their own aggressive outbursts play out in real time against a backdrop of your absolute stillness, making their behavior look grotesquely out of place, desperate and unhinged, even to themselves. The shame they tried so hard to avoid by attacking you is now doubled, amplified by the glaring reality that they have lost control of both the interaction and themselves. They are forced to chew on their own venom, experiencing the very humiliation, frustration, and helplessness they intended to inflict upon you. By simply refusing to participate in the exchange, you allow their own toxic momentum to turn on them, transforming their attack into a self-inflicted psychological wound. Sustaining the upper hand in any interpersonal conflict relies on a single fundamental principle. Ultimate power belongs to the person who requires nothing from the interaction. When dealing with a manipulative or hostile individual, their primary goal is always leverage. They seek to pull you onto a tactical battlefield where emotions run high, logic breaks down, and reactive statements can be twisted and used against you. By maintaining an unwavering posture of non-reactive neutrality, you render every single one of their traditional offensive weapons entirely obsolete. You are not fighting back. You are simply refusing to step onto their battlefield. This complete absence of emotional engagement converts what was meant to be a high-stakes ambush into a decisive psychological checkmate, ensuring that future attempts to trigger or control you are dismantled before they even begin. When you establish absolute neutrality as your permanent baseline, you alter the manipulator's risk-reward calculation. Manipulative behavior is a learned strategy that persists only because it historically yields results. It requires a significant outlay of psychological energy to construct traps, manufacture drama, and execute calculated provocations. When those efforts consistently collide with your quiet, unshakable composure, the manipulator receives zero ROI, return on investment. Their brain is forced to register a critical behavioral lesson. Attacking you is an expensive, high-effort enterprise that yields absolutely no leverage, no satisfaction, and no control. Over time, this consistent lack of payoff extinguishes the undesirable behavior entirely, forcing them to either abandon their attempts or seek out easier, more reactive targets elsewhere. Executing this level of strategic neutrality transforms your presence into an unassailable fortress. You stop viewing their provocations as personal attacks that demand a defense, and instead analyze them as desperate behavioral leaks that expose their own profound vulnerabilities. Every time they attempt to bait you, their overt aggression or subtle subversion merely highlights their lack of self-control, while your quiet stillness underscores your absolute dominance. You do not need to deliver a biting retort, point out their logical fallacies, or demand an apology. Your refusal to be moved by their presence is the ultimate declaration of superiority. It communicates that their words do not possess enough gravity to pull you out of your orbit, rendering them entirely powerless in your sphere of influence.